Hi guys, tomorrow morning we are getting 100 or maybe a little more than 100 Freedom Ranger chickens, day old or 2 day old chicks. They will have had a long ride from Pennsylvania from the Freedom Ranger hatchery. They come from an Amish group in Pennsylvania, and they are the most wonderful, hardy chicks. Even though they have such a rough ride getting here, they are consistently healthy and hardy, and we just love them, which is why we go ahead and order them in this way. Chicks are naturally made to go 2 or 3 days without eating after they're hatched. This is nature's way of helping a mama hen who lays several eggs and sits on them to wait until they've all hatched before she leaves. So these little chicks are just fine, but they do have some special care they need when they arrive. So this is our setup here. We have 2 of these. They're water troughs, but we use them for brooders for the first few days for these chicks. They make excellent brooders because they're round. It's best not to have any corners, because the chicks, when they're little, tend to pile up, and if they pile up in the corner too much, they can suffocate some of them. So keeping rounded corners is a help. They're also going to need some heat. They don't have their mamas, so they're going to need heat lamps. We have several heat lamps. We may not need them all, but depending upon the weather, we'll turn them on and off. They also need a way to get out of the heat. So when the lights are on down here, it might be warm in one half of the brooder, but it'll be cooler in the other half of the brooder. And we have this brooder in our barn. This just protects from the weather. We get a lot of strange weather in the spring here in Missouri, so this keeps the weather pretty consistent. The main thing is chicks need to not have a draft. They need fresh air, but they don't need to have a draft. It's important to keep the drafts away, and they cannot be wet. So if you can keep them dry and keep them out of drafts, they're going to have a much better chance of assimilating and just doing it real well. So a couple things we do is we put pine shavings into the bottom of this, but we're also going to lay down some paper towel, just a couple. This helps their feet to grip a little bit better, but it's also going to help them find food. They're not really going to know what is and what isn't food initially, but we lay down the paper towel and we'll sprinkle a little bit of their organic starter chick feed onto that, so they can start looking at the ground and scratching and getting started right away in doing what chickens are supposed to do. We'll also take some grasses from our pasture and we'll sprinkle that all around so that we can get them started looking at the ground and scratching and mimic nature as much as possible in this protected environment. We're also going to bring in some soil, or in this case some little sand and some rocks, which is grit. We want to get grit into them right away. This helps them with grinding up their food. So we want to give them access to that and have them start scratching at that right away. When they first arrive, we're going to be putting these little waterers in, and every chick that comes in is going to have its beak just dipped, not drowning them in here, but just very gently dipping every beak. All 100 of the chicks will have their beak dipped in this electrolyte mix of water. They've been on a long ride, and the 2 things that they're going to need right away are warmth and hydration. So as soon as they get warmed up, then they'll start eating, and once they start eating, they do really well. So to get them started right away and get them warmed up, they'll have their heat lamps. We'll also have this water sitting under the heat lamp, so it's warm, and that'll help warm their body as well. And we'll dip each and every bird's beak into the water, and usually they'll get a little drink of it, and they'll like that, and they'll go right back to it, and they'll drink and drink and drink a lot. But you want to show them where the water is right away and dip each beak into the water. From there, they're usually pretty hardy, and they'll be running around and scratching, and they'll start to eat. They cannot regulate their body temperature on their own, so they have to be able to move in and out of the warm area to a cooler area and back and forth like that. So this is the brooder where we start them all out. We have a larger brooder we move them to after about a week, where they'll stay there until they are old enough to be able to get out onto the pastures. So when the chicks arrive, we'll be putting them right in here, and I'll show you that when they get here. Okay, so it's early in the morning and Keith has gone to pick up the 100 or 105 or so chicks from the post office. They've had a long ride, so I'm here getting everything set up so they can get acclimated very quickly. I've got the heat lamps on. It's not real cold this morning and it's fairly protective here in the barn, but there's a pretty good draft. So this container will keep the draft off of them. And I've got their water set up with some electrolytes in it. And I've put the water under the heat lamp so that it'll get nice and warm. If they've got cold bodies and they're drinking ice cold water, that's not going to help them warm up. The most important thing is to get them warmed up and to get them hydrated. And then I've thrown some of their food onto the ground, onto the paper towel, where they can easily distinguish what is food. If I were to put it right in the shavings, they might pick up shavings and not really know what's food and what's not food. So they'll get the idea really quickly. I also have a little dish of grit in there, so they'll have that to get to right away. And generally these birds, these Freedom Rangers, are very hardy. We rarely lose any. The Cornish Cross are not so hardy that way, but these birds are usually pretty vibrant, so they should be here soon, and then we'll get them all in there. Here they are. Let's get the box open. Alright, see how everybody's doing. They look pretty lively. Okay, just gonna get each one out. It looks pretty lively. Get some of the warm water. Dip their beak in it. You have to do everyone this way. Just trying to dip their beak in it. Okay, come on. There we go. There we go now, guys. Get a little bit. Get a little water there. Right away, they're going for the food. thing you can do to help monitor if the chicks have enough warmth or if they have too much warmth is to just really watch the chicks. If they are all piled up on the far end there under the heat lamps, if they were all piled up there, then we could pretty well be assured that they are not getting enough heat, and so we might turn on an additional heat lamp or maybe lower the heat lamps if needed, if it's a really cold day. Or if we find them piled up on the other side, away from the heat lamps, then we could, that's an indication that they are really getting too hot and they need to cool down. So we might turn off the heat lamp or put a lower wattage bulb in. But what we want to see is what we're seeing right now, and they're spread out. Some are under the heat lamp, some are not under the heat lamp. Some may go back and forth, so they're getting out of it when they need to get out of it, or they're going into it and taking a nap. But when they're spread out, then you can be sure that you probably have the right amount of heat available to them and the right amount of open space where they can get out of the heat, because they really can't regulate their own temperatures yet. You have to do it for them, just like the mama hen would do, giving them an option, and they'll get out of the heat if they need to. So it looks like we have it just about right. So they're good to go. And we'll just keep checking on them each day. All right, so the chickens are all set up in both of the brooders. We have a larger one, and then this is a smaller brooder. So altogether 100 chicks, and they're all settling in, and some of them starting to take a nap now that they've run around a bit. They almost look like they're dead. When they lay down, they sprawl out and get under the heat lamps. Or when we open up the barn door, they get some natural sunlight. Natural sunlight is a really important thing for them to get too. It really kicks in the pituitary gland, which is a growth hormone, so that helps them to get going with their growth. It's a very healthy thing for them to have some sunlight. So they'll get some sunlight throughout the day too, but right now we're just concerned about getting them past the first few days as they get stronger. In about a week, or maybe less than a week, with Freedom Rangers, they grow so fast, faster than a laying hen. So maybe in 4 or 5 days, they will be moved to this larger brooder here. Kaylin made a cute sign. So in this brooder, we'll be fixing it up. It doesn't have the mulch in it yet. We'll put mulch down, we'll adjust the heat lamps and get it all cleaned up. This helps them to be protected from not only the drafts, but we've caged the entire thing in to keep the sparrows and other barn birds in here from getting into their feed. They're just sort of a nuisance. And so we'll have this all fixed up in just a few days with some fresh mulch, and they will stay in here just long enough until the weather is good for quite a few days out, and they are strong enough to be out in the weather under their shelter. And when they get to that point, they will be then moved to this chicken pen, which is moved around on the pastures. They'll go in here, and during the night they'll be locked in for safety, but during the day there's a door on the back side of this meat chicken pen. We can open up the door and they can be free to come out and be on any of the pastures that we have them situated. So they'll be on about a half-acre pasture for 6 to 8 weeks, and they can get lots of bugs and grass that way. But until they're a little bit stronger, they'll be in the barn. But this will be the next step, and we'll show you that in another video. Thanks for watching.